Tonight, we need to talk about something happening right in front of us, that most Americans still haven't truly seen: a secret military campaign, ordered by Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, with consequences the vast majority of Americans have not yet recognized, do not fully understand, and are certainly not mentally prepared to confront. While the daily news cycle is filled with louder stories, out in the Caribbean, the U.S. military has carried out dozens of attacks. No trials, no public evidence, no legal process that we've always believed is required in a nation that claims to uphold the rule of law. At least 87 people have been killed. 22 airstrikes have taken place in just a few weeks. And the most alarming part isn't just the numbers, it's how it's happening, quietly, secretly, with almost no outside oversight. Inside the Pentagon, the situation is far more chaotic than the public has been told. Some fear this operation is blowing past every legal norm, others warn the international fallout will be massive, and some, quite frankly, are just trying to keep their names off the hell out of the investigation that is absolutely coming. But here's the most important thing: these strikes are not a one-off event, they are not a rash decision. This is policy, a policy being executed again and again, opening the door to a chain of crises most Americans haven't even begun to register. If you think this is just a drug interdiction operation, stick with me, because what's happening under Hegseth's kill orders reveals a truth far bigger than that. And to understand why things have gotten this serious, we have to look straight at the operation the Pentagon calls Operation Southern Spear, a name that sounds tough but hides everything the public has never been allowed to see. Since early September, under the direction of Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, the U.S. military has conducted at least 22 airstrikes against vessels suspected of drug trafficking in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific. 22. And in those strikes, 87 people have been killed. 87 human beings, no trial, no court, no chance to defend themselves, not a single piece of public evidence ever shown to the American people or to Congress. No indictments, no names released, no detailed justification for each death, just airstrikes and vague after-action reports. To give you a clearer picture, these are not standard drug busts, where law enforcement boards the vessel, seizes the contraband, arrests the suspects, and puts them into the justice system. This is pure military force, missiles, drones, special operators, used against targets the public has never been shown proof actually are who the government says they are. And if you're wondering, why haven't we heard more about this? Why is a lethal operation of this scale happening almost in silence? That is exactly the question I want you to ask, because these numbers, 22 strikes, 87 dead, never appeared in major press releases. They've only surfaced through leaks, scattered reports, and military sources talking to investigative journalists. And when you piece it all together, you start to see what most Americans still don't: this is not spontaneous action. This is policy, a deliberate, repeated course of action directed from the highest levels of the Department of Defense. The kill orders are not one-time or special circumstances. This is a systematic, purposeful campaign involving elite units like SEAL Team 6, wrapped in legal reasoning that remains extremely murky. In the current national security environment, with a controversial Secretary of Defense, a White House that prefers unilateral action, and an oversight structure of oversight being pushed to the sidelines, this operation is not just a drug war effort. It is a test of how much power the executive branch can award itself when it believes the public isn't paying attention or lacks the information to push back. But the most important part is not what has already happened. And I need to stress this: the most alarming part is what comes next. When an administration discovers it can conduct dozens of airstrikes without major backlash, without presenting evidence, without full accountability, it sets an extraordinarily dangerous precedent. A precedent most citizens are completely unaware of, because most of the information about this operation is being concealed, fragmented, or only released after it has been sanitized in official reports. And that is why we are talking about this tonight, because once you see the full picture, you realize Operation Southern Spear is not just an operation, it is a warning. It is the first visible ripple of a much larger wave about to crash into American democracy, and most Americans still have no idea it's coming. So now, to understand the chain of events that is pushing the United States to the edge of a crisis almost no one sees, I want you to walk with me, minute by minute, through the opening strike of Operation Southern Spear, the incident that took place on September 2nd. This is the strike military officials later called Strike 1, but in reality it was the moment that defined the entire campaign and the clearest mirror of how power has been wielded. Picture this off the coast of Trinidad. A small boat with 11 people aboard is moving through waters the Pentagon claims are linked to drug trafficking. Overhead, U.S. surveillance aircraft track the vessel for hours. There is no chase, no attempt to board, no warning, just thermal imagery and satellite feeds streaming back to a control room where senior officers and legal advisors watch every move. This is not a modern war movie scene. This is how the U.S. military operates in real time. And in every report I've read, from eyewitnesses, from defense officials, from closed congressional briefings, one detail repeats. The kill order did not come after lengthy debate or hours of legal deliberation. No, the order is described as direct, brief, unambiguous. And according to sources who were on that secure call, it was exactly 3 words: kill them all. It sounds unbelievable, but that is the precise phrase multiple officials used when recounting the event. And when an order like that is given in an operation where the identity, role, and threat level of the people on the boat have never been verified, you know we have crossed a very dangerous line in the state's use of force. The missile is fired from a drone. Within seconds the boat erupts in flames. Fire, smoke, splintered wood, debris shooting upward with the steam. 11 human beings, none of whom had a chance to flee or surrender. All that remains is drone footage streaming live to a room in the United States, where officials watch the explosion and nod, target destroyed. Except that's what they thought. Because minutes later, through the black smoke and still smoldering wreckage, 2 figures appear. 2 survivors. They're clinging to the broken hull, hands gripping half-burned wood, trying to stay afloat. And this is the moment the entire story veers into darkness. In any military operation that follows international standards, the appearance of survivors triggers an entirely different protocol. They are considered hors de combat, no longer able to fight, and under international law they must be protected. But that is not what happened on September 2nd. According to testimony from closed-door meetings and sources inside the chain of command, the operators saw the 2 survivors on camera. They confirmed they were alive. They watched them clinging to the wreckage, and then a second order was given. A follow-up attack, a double-tap strike. A second missile was fired, this time aimed directly at the 2 men fighting to stay alive. Both were torn apart on the surface of the water. Only then did the officials conclude, target fully neutralized. Later, when Congress demanded answers, the Pentagon claimed the second strike was only to sink the remaining hull to eliminate a navigational hazard. And I know when you hear that you feel exactly like I did when I first read the report. That explanation isn't just paper thin, it's an insult to the intelligence of anyone who's ever looked at an ocean map. A half-burned small boat drifting in hundreds of miles of open sea is a navigational hazard so severe it requires a several $100,000 missile, at the exact moment human beings are using it to stay alive. No investigator believes that. No legal expert accepts it. And no member of Congress left those briefings without asking serious questions. Because when you look at the actual sequence, initial strike, survivors spotted, second strike to finish them off, you cannot call it accidental. You cannot call it sinking the vessel for maritime safety. This was deliberate, a deliberate decision that stepped over every legal and moral line America claims to stand for. And if you think the story ends there, I'm sorry to tell you, this was only the beginning. And to understand why the September 2nd strike became the center of a political legal firestorm, we have to look at something most Americans have never explained clearly. The administration deliberately changed the legal character of this fight. They didn't just carry out strikes, they built a legal framework to justify them, a framework that, if left unchallenged, could open the door to far more dangerous actions in the future. And the key is one seemingly simple assertion: drug traffickers = terrorists. It sounds tough, decisive, even politically effective. But legally, it is an extremely serious and wrong move. Because when you label a criminal group terrorists, you don't just change the word, you change the entire legal regime that governs how the government may use force. Drug criminals fall under law enforcement, DEA, Coast Guard, FBI, courts, juries. Terrorists in an armed conflict fall under the laws of war, rules that allow lethal force without warning, without arrest, without trial. And when you unilaterally move a group of people from the first category to the second, without evidence, without risk assessment, without congressional authorization, you are not enforcing the law, you are rewriting it. That is exactly what happened when the Justice Department, at the White House's request, had the Office of Legal Counsel (OLC) issue a memo declaring that the United States is in a non-international armed conflict with drug trafficking organizations. I've read these documents, I've cross-checked them with international law experts, and I can tell you the memo is circular reasoning designed to rubber stamp what was already happening, not to evaluate its legality. The OLC argument goes like this. We are in an armed conflict, therefore strikes under the laws of war are lawful, but when you ask, why are we in an armed conflict? The answer is, because we are conducting strikes under the laws of war. That is a logical circle. And a logical circle cannot justify killing people under international law. The truly frightening thing here is not just the law dodging, it's the attempt to turn the act of killing into the proof that the killing was legal. And here's something most Americans don't realize. The laws of war are not a switch the government can flip whenever it wants. They are designed to govern actual armed conflicts between organized armed groups. But on September 2nd, the people on that boat did not shoot back. They did not use weapons. There was no indication they were a fighting force. There wasn't even proof they were involved in drug trafficking. Yet with one OLC memo, they were placed in the category of lawful to kill column. And once the government can do that to one group, it can do it to anyone. This is not hyperbole. History is full of examples. Every time an administration expands its power by rewriting the law itself, the institutions that protect citizens erode. Remember the post-9/11 years: indefinite detention, enhanced interrogation, drone kill lists. All of it started as things the public was told were exceptions. But exceptions repeated enough times become the new standard. And the current administration is testing whether it can turn the war on drugs, an area of criminal justice, into an armed battlefield in order to bypass legal restraints. Listen carefully. If a government can simply declare war in order to avoid the law, then there are no longer any boundaries. No clear limits on who can be targeted, when or under what criteria. Once the law is bent to serve power, any group of people in any context can be labeled a threat to justify violence. And that is why most Americans do not yet grasp how dangerous Operation Southern Spear really is, not just for what happened on the water, but for what is happening to how our government is redefining the law beneath our feet. When the law starts being written to fit political needs, we are no longer in a democracy protected by a constitution. We are stepping into a system where power interprets itself and is always right exactly the way it wants to be. And this is the point where the story becomes not only legally dangerous but institutionally terrifying, because what happened after the September 2nd strike reveals the one thing every democracy should fear most: the deliberate blurring, distortion, and manipulation of information flowing between the executive branch and Congress. I want you to picture this chain of events not as a partisan fight, but as a stress test of the system, whether those who hold power will honor their duty to report and be accountable. Because after the strikes took place, remember, not one isolated incident but dozens. Congress, doing its constitutional job, demanded briefings. And what they initially received was a sanitized, edited, scrubbed version that no longer reflected the true nature of the operation. The clearest example is the story of the second strike on September 2nd. The Pentagon told Congress the follow-up missile was only to sink the vessel to eliminate a navigational hazard. They did not mention the two survivors clinging to the wreckage. They did not mention the drone footage showing they were alive. They did not mention the order to finish it. All Congress heard was a safe, clean, and most importantly, untrue version. But then something happened. A bipartisan group of members demanded to see the unedited video, and when they walked out of that classified viewing room, many looked like they had just witnessed something that went against every principle a modern democracy is supposed to stand on. According to sources in the room, one senator said, "I have never seen anything like this in all my years of service." Another simply said, "We were lied to, and you have to understand how grave that moment is." Congress, the only branch with the power to control the executive through budget, law, and oversight, had been deceived by the very people they are tasked with overseeing. When that happens in any democracy, we have to ask, is this an accident or is it a pattern? And when you look at the Pentagon's entire course of conduct, hiding information, providing incomplete versions, delaying documents, stonewalling questions, the answer is clear: it's a pattern. A pattern in which the executive branch decides for itself how much Congress is allowed to know. And when one branch of government gets to choose what another branch is allowed to see, the balance of power the Constitution designed no longer exists. When an administration starts treating Congress like a secondary audience, you should brace yourself for something very bad coming next. Because in America's constitutional republic, Congress is not the audience. It is not there for the highlight reel. Congress is the overseer, the holder of the purse strings, the body with the authority to stop, redirect, or reverse executive action. When the executive deliberately withholds or distorts information, it is not just violating a legal duty, it is breaking the single most important pillar of the republic: no one gets to police themselves. Let me spell out the consequences, because I think most Americans haven't grasped how serious this is. First, Congress cannot perform oversight if the information is doctored. You cannot review an action if the people who carried it out only show you the parts they want you to see. Second, once the executive realizes it can get away with deceiving Congress, it will do it again, bolder, deeper, and more recklessly. History proves that every single time. Third, it creates a gray zone of power the Constitution never intended, a zone where decisions about human lives, the use of force, and military action face no real oversight. And then there's one more consequence: trust. Trust between branches of government, trust between the system and the people. Once that trust is broken, the system doesn't just malfunction, it starts to sink. And we are in that moment when the people responsible for telling Congress the truth chose to bend it instead of facing it. This is not just a bad briefing. This is a warning about governance by darkness, a model that, if not stopped, will become the new normal. And that new normal, if accepted, will shake this republic to its roots. If you think this crisis is confined to inside the Beltway rooms between the Pentagon and Congress, I'm here to tell you most Americans haven't seen the other side of the storm yet. Because what started as a secret campaign in the Caribbean has now spilled across the entire international chessboard, and the world's reaction shows we are facing a diplomatic and legal crisis many haven't registered yet. Start with Colombia. This is not some distant country. It is one of our closest partners in the drug war for decades. Yet after the September 2nd strike and the ones that followed, the president of Colombia publicly accused the United States of killing civilians, including innocent fishermen. When one of your closest allies says the US may have committed what could amount to war crimes, that is not just criticism. It is a signal to the entire region that America has crossed a critical line in international law. The Venezuelan government, always eager for ammunition against Washington, immediately seized on it. State television has been running non-stop footage of burning boats, grieving families, and Colombia's statements turning Operation Southern Spear into propaganda, proving the US treats Latin American sovereignty and Latin American lives as disposable. We can dismiss Venezuelan propaganda, but the message is landing with many other countries in the region. When America's image becomes that of a nation that uses unilateral force without rules, without evidence, without allies, we lose something vital: the moral legitimacy we have long relied on to lead the world. And it's not just Colombia or Venezuela. US allies in Europe, Asia, and South America are asking, if the US can label any group terrorists to justify missile strikes, what stops them from doing it somewhere else? What the current administration seems not to grasp is that international law, especially on the use of force, exists on mutual respect between nations. When the US breaks that principle, we don't just weaken our ability to criticize others when they do the same, we isolate ourselves. But the fallout isn't only diplomatic. Inside the United States, the divide is widening. Even inside the Republican Party, where the administration might expect its strongest support, sharp arguments have broken out. Some defend the operation as finally getting tough on criminals, but others, including senators with military experience, are warning that these actions could expose US service members to future war crimes charges. And remember, under international law, war crimes have no statute of limitations. A service member who took part in these strikes, even believing they were following lawful orders, can still be prosecuted years later in an international court or by another country if they ever set foot there. We've seen it before: the former Yugoslavia, Rwanda, Sierra Leone, Myanmar. Sovereign nations gave the orders, but that did not protect individuals once international law stepped in. And what worries me most, and what I think most Americans haven't yet imagined, is that we are moving very close to a scenario where U.S. service members, for following U.S. government orders, become international investigation targets. Congressional committees are gearing up for hearings, not one, but multiple: armed services, foreign affairs, intelligence, oversight. Once those hearings start, more information will come out. When more information comes out, international pressure will rise, and when pressure rises, the legal holes the administration is trying to paper over will become targets for human rights organizations and international courts. This is not just a scandal. This is a multi-layered crisis: diplomatic, legal, political, constitutional. A crisis most Americans haven't fully seen yet, because most of what's happening in Bogota, Brussels, Caracas, and in secure congressional spaces doesn't make the evening news. But that wave is coming, and when it breaks, we will not be able to say we weren't warned. If you look at the big picture right now, you'll see that what happened in Operation Southern Spear is not the end of a chain of events. It is the beginning. The beginning of what I believe will become one of the largest constitutional, political, legal crises in years to come. And most Americans have no idea how deep into dangerous waters we have already sailed. There are 5 things coming next, and if you want to understand where this story is headed, we have to look at each one straight on. First, the congressional investigations will expand and drag on. What's happening now, document requests, classified briefings, is just the warm-up. Once committees start subpoenaing witnesses, call logs, recordings, raw video, internal emails, the entire chain of command will be dragged into the light. No administration wants Congress looking inside its decision-making process when there are signs it deliberately evaded oversight. This will go on for months, possibly years, and every step will add more pressure on the Pentagon, the White House, and everyone behind this campaign. Second, there will be leaks. Not just one, not just video, documents, operations logs, intelligence assessments, legal memos, even internal chat messages. Because when an operation is hidden this tightly, when people inside start fearing they'll be made scapegoats, they always find a way to get the truth out on their own terms. The press, independent investigators, international human rights groups, they're all waiting for that moment. And I can tell you, the truth has a way of finding daylight. Third, legal pressure will intensify both domestically and internationally. Colombia is preparing submissions to international bodies. Families of the dead will file lawsuits. Human rights organizations will demand UN action. And most importantly, once the details of each strike are exposed, the administration will have to justify the legal basis for every single one. They will have to answer the question they've dodged so far: under what law did you kill these people? And when the answer doesn't hold, the pressure will become a storm. Fourth, the risk of prosecution for Secretary Hegseth and others down the chain is very real. Under international law, just following orders is not an absolute shield. Those who gave the orders, those who approved them, those who knew and did nothing, all can be investigated. What many don't realize is that even if there is no prosecution at home, other countries can still prosecute when their citizens are killed. Involved officers and officials could face travel restrictions, arrest abroad, or international warrants. No future president can simply pardon that away. So the risk isn't just for Hegseth, it is for everyone directly tied to this operation. And finally, the fifth thing is a crisis of trust. When the public learns more of the truth, when they see Congress was deceived, when they see footage of survivors being killed in the second strike, trust in the military, in the government, in the way this country uses violence in the name of national security will be profoundly shaken. And trust, once lost, is almost impossible to restore. This is not just a scandal. This is a test of whether American democracy can still correct itself. A test of whether the rule of law still means anything when it stands in the way of political power. A test of whether truth still has a voice in this country. I want you to watch closely. I want you to ask questions. I want you to refuse to let any administration, regardless of party, redefine the law through violence or use war as an excuse to escape accountability. Because if we don't, if we let this model become normal, What happened in the Caribbean will not remain an exception. It will become the template. And when violence becomes the template, the law becomes optional. We cannot let this story sink like yesterday's news, because what comes next after Pete Hegseth's kill orders will shape the future of this democracy. And if we don't look straight at it, if we don't ask the questions, if we don't demand the truth, we will lose the very thing America exists to protect. This is not the time to look away. This is the time to look straight on. This is the time to speak up. This is the time to hold on to what is right. If you want to keep following analysis like this, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Thank you for your time. See you in the next one.